Welcome to the Art of Medicine, the program that explores the arts, business, and clinical aspects of the practice of medicine. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner, and my guest today is Dr. Ken Sommerville. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ken, well, we've known each other, it's decades, right? And you were kind of my biggest connection to the world of pharma. And you've spent a lifetime in pharma. And I wrote to you because I thought you had retired and were then sort of free to say whatever you wanted. And but I understand that may not be entirely the case, that you've actually got a new temporary, not retired yet. But what I wanted to get from you today is some advice for clinicians who are thinking about the pharma industry. I remember in my training, pharma was considered to be the dark side. And I think that may have changed. And so tell us your story. How did you get interested in pharma, and which companies have you worked with, and how has it progressed?
Great. Well, thanks, Andy. And again, thanks for having me on this program. I hope I can dispel some of the assumptions people make about the industry, because I do like it very much. It's worked well for me. But like everything else in life, it's not for everybody. And it's a part of medicine. It's not something that's outside the medical world. It's a part of it. And I think it's one that we should know and understand, at least, because there are some misconceptions, I think. And I think we're going to see it. Obviously, this past year, we saw how valuable the pharma industry can be in getting the vaccines out with COVID. So let's think about that first, but I'll give you how it happened with me. I was in private practice for over 11 years in central Pennsylvania, in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. And I was basically the neurologist for the county. And that was fun, and it was nice. And I had wonderful help from Dr. Brennan, who was the head of neurology at Hershey at the time. He was only about 10, 15 miles away or so, and he was wonderful. And I did have some part-time helpers as well. I had Carl Ellenberger, the neuro-ophthalmologist, was also working with me. So I wasn't completely alone, but pretty much, it was a lot of, I'd call a lot of work that didn't allow me time to do much of anything else. And out of the clear blue, a former colleague who had helped train me, it was Neil Sussman, called me and said, how would you like to do research in epilepsy? Now, epilepsy was always sort of my favorite in neurology. I got an interest in it, in medical school, and then it grew after that. I didn't see a tremendous amount of epilepsy where I was, but I did see some, and found it fascinating and interesting. Also, finding out that it was hard for physicians to use the newest things. There weren't that many new drugs then. We had phenobarbital, Dilantin. Everybody remembers those days. And then, of course, valproate had just basically come out, but no one was using it much. And you could see that it was really making a difference for a lot of people's lives. So I had a very positive kind of opinion of the pharmaceutical industry for several reasons, but that was among them. And with Dr. Sussman's call, I had looked at advertisements for joining the industry, and I thought, oh, well, if I join the industry, I won't, see patients as much. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. That's something you really have to decide on your own. But I thought, now this is fascinating, and I'm really, if I'm going to be doing this forever, just being on night call, I'll never really progress or learn more. So maybe it's time for a change. And so I joined the pharmaceutical industry. The company I joined no longer exists. It was Marion Merrill Dow, and the drug was, believe it or not, vigabatrin, which we all know had its problems, but did eventually get approved in infantile spasms. But at that time, they were developing it for partial seizures in adults, basically, which most of the drugs get approved for. But it was also thought to have this intramyelinic edema problem, and there were evoked potentials and MRI scans that were being taken to look for this in humans. It had happened in monkeys, but not in humans. And this was before the visual field problem came up. That was discovered a little later. But at any rate, I joined Marion Merrill Dow, and vigabatrin was having its problems, as we know. And then I was recruited by Abbott, and I went over to Abbott for over 9 years. Now, here's the thing, when you join the industry, depending on your background, you may have to learn a lot. And having been a country neurologist, if you will, I didn't have a lot of background that prepared me for it. So it took me a while to learn the ropes, so to speak. And that's something you really have to do. I think for the most part, if you join the industry, you have to learn how the industry works, how it's set up. And we'll talk a little more about that, but that's a really important thing. So I started off as what was known as a clinical scientist. And then at Abbott, I was an assistant director. And I was I was hired to develop tigabian, or good old gabatril, which really was not much of a commercial success. But that was my primary duty. And then another neurologist who was at Abbott left, and then I was given Depakote as well. So at Abbott, I had an up and coming drug, and then one that was well established. But the interesting thing was, as you know, valproate had both epilepsy and then migraine, and was approved basically for epilepsy, and then later for mania, which was the first new drug in manic depressive disorder. I think in 20 years, all they had was lithium up to that time. So I got to meet psychiatrists then. I started to learn how drugs can be useful in one area as well as another, and that you work with different specialties. And this went on over 9 years, and I ended up having, I think, about 4 or 5 approvals, where I was basically the medical person writing a lot of the documents and interacting with the FDA and learning a tremendous amount. It was just, a really good time. But at that point, I thought, well, here I am. I got to be senior medical director, but I got a lot of approvals, but didn't seem to go anywhere. Most of the time at Abbott, the antibiotics were and HIV were really, the focus was on those things. I mean, obviously, neurology was important, but was not the center of attention. So I was offered a position as vice president at Schwartz Pharma. That's another company that no longer exists. And there I got to work not only on lacosamide in epilepsy, but also the Nupro reticotine patch for Parkinson's. So here was another area of neurology to get involved in. We were at Schwartz. That was great. It was a foreign company. I got to go over to Germany, got to use my very elementary German. I found how poorly I spoke German in that, but it was fun. And all the Germans spoke English. So, I mean, it was not a challenge to use German, but it was fun. That was something else that, was kind of a difference. And, I was in Germany quite a bit. It was nice to be in another country and learn how they're doing things. And so then, we were taken over by UCB, the Belgian company, and got to do some work on Keppra, as well as continue with lacosamide, which has been quite successful. And then it was basically, I wanted to try something else that was where I was in charge of a unit and a product. So I moved over to another company that doesn't exist called King Pharmaceuticals. They were based in New Jersey, but their research was here in North Carolina. And there I worked on abuse deterrent opioids, which was something I really didn't know too much about, but I got to learn about drug addiction. And also there was the types of trials they do, in other words, trials looking at drug liking and addiction and so forth. And that turned out to be extremely valuable for me later on. So everything you learn sort of builds up. And we were taken over again, this time by Pfizer. And so there it was fun. I got to go up to New York and interact with, the resources in that company, as you may well imagine, were spectacular. It was just wonderful. All the things that, you could do there. Wonderful people. But I was after a few years, I thought, well, abuse deterrent opioids is not something I want to keep doing forever. I mean, it was good for the time. I had several approvals, with abuse deterrent opioids. But then I got another call out of the blue. These calls out of the blue are interesting. And this was a former colleague at Abbott who asked me if I wanted to work on epilepsy again. And I thought, oh my goodness, of course I would. He said, yes, we have a drug. It's called cannabidiol, and we're looking at it for seizures. And I thought, oh, this sounds terrific. And GW, of course, a British company, and my family is British, so that was nice. Got to go over to London, but basically, we went from the ground up, working with cannabidiol to design a development program. So that was fun to develop, to develop a program with other people. Of course, no one does one thing on their own, but it was just great. And that I have to say, the people in that company, the cooperation there was just wonderful. It was just such a real pleasure to work with them. Everyone had in their minds we were going to help the children, and meeting the families of these children with very horrendous epilepsy, as you might know with Dravet and Lennox-Gastaut, was so rewarding. They were such wonderful people. They, just were, spectacular people who had tough lives, but they just were so cooperative and had really helped to get that drug approved at the FDA advisory, as we know. But at that point, I was retirement age, so at that point, I took retirement. But I did continue to work with GW for a while, reviewing data, and then went into the consultancy where I am now. But I was just basically hired part-time by Xenon Pharmaceuticals to work on several drugs they have in their pipeline for epilepsy. Again, so it's deja vu all over again. It's great to be working with these products, and they're wonderful. It's a Canadian company, so again, each company you go to has its own kind of way of doing things and has its own kind of milieu. So you have to learn that. But the people there seem to be wonderful. They're very enthusiastic, and I think there is this sense that you're really doing something that will help a lot of people rather than just helping one individual patient, which is wonderful too. We all know that. But here you're really helping a whole population of people. So it's a little different. So that's where we are now. It's been a long and interesting progression over the years.
Ken, that was a great story. And I had a lot of questions in my mind as you went along. I didn't want to interrupt because you're doing a beautiful job of kind of laying it all out. And well, first, I want to go back all the way to the beginning. You're in practice. I was in private practice before, and yeah, I mean, there is this sense at one point I was a solo neurologist in a 300-bed hospital. So I had no nurse practitioner, physician assistant, it's just me doing all the consults, from morning till night. I had some help. Telemedicine was just starting, and Yale was down the road. So they would take the strokes in the middle of the night. But otherwise, everything, then I'd see them in the morning, and it just, you're just kind of on a treadmill. Every morning there's a big new list,
and, oh boy, yeah.
Right. And it never stops. And it's very hard to sort of step away from that and say, well, I think I'll learn about, Dravet syndrome. It's like, no, beep, 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 off you go. So I've done a lot now because of my work in locum tenens with physicians who are considering non-clinical careers. This is a big topic now. And there are many physicians, John Jerica is one I work with, whose whole specialty is helping physicians, consider non-clinical careers because they're stuck on an unhappy treadmill. So I want you to go back in your story. I mean, here you are, 9 years into a successful practice. You've got your turf, right? You've got patients. You're good at what you do. You've got your resources, your network. You're making an adequate living, I assume. I mean, there's always the possibility to make more, but you're doing okay. And then this call comes in and you go, yeah, non-clinical career, that'll work. So take me through some of the thinking, that you had. Did you see this as a baby step or a leap? Because, it's a bridge that's hard to come back from. To go back into private practice if you've been out for a few years is almost impossible because of regulations and malpractice and accreditation. And so I mean, it's a big leap. What were the personal things that drove you across that bridge?
Yeah, oh, thanks for asking that, Andy, because that was probably one of the toughest decisions in my whole life. And it took over a week. And the first decision I made was not to take it. And part of that was that, first of all, in Lebanon, I had been active politically for a judge to be elected, who was a very honest guy, and I'm still happy about that. We had wonderful friends at church. Our sons were growing up, and had lots of friends. And then I thought, boy, my patients, I had a number who I had taken care of for years. That wasn't an easy one. It really wasn't. But when I made the decision to stay, my wife wouldn't talk to me. So that had a real impression. She said, "This is a new beginning for you, and I see what's happening to you here, and I think we have to change." So I have to give my wife tremendous credit anyway for everything, but that was one where she sort of put her foot down, and I called back, and of course, at Mary Merrill Dow, they were kind of shaken because they thought, well, this guy said yeah, no, and now he's saying yes, and can we trust this guy? And so they had additional interviews with me, and it was decided, to go ahead. Now, interestingly enough, in my family, my father at the time was alive, and he was in corporate USA for years, mainly at RCA, and he had said, if they're giving you a good deal and this is what you want, take it. My brother thought he had not had good um, uh, experiences in the corporate world. He was at Boeing and some other companies, and he said, they're going to rule your life, and you're going to get moved around, and blah blah blah. Well, we moved out to Cincinnati, where I was supposed to be, and that night we were told good news and bad news. The good news is the project's going well. The bad news is you move to Kansas City next year. And I thought, whoa, maybe my brother was right, So we moved around, and we went to Kansas City, and I saw that Mary Merrill Dow and by Gabatron were having problems, and I thought, well, maybe I better go on somewhere else. And Abbott recruited me. Then we had to move up to Chicago, but then we stayed in Chicago over 9 years, and that worked out fine. But my oldest son was a teenager then. He had a lot of anger over it. There was some real problems, but it all sort of got better with time. And so what's the bottom line here, Andy? It's a tough decision, and like I said, I wanted, I really missed my patients and missed the camaraderie and all the things we had built up where I was. But it is possible. I know you had said a few minutes ago, well, once you make the leap, that's it. Well, yeah, that's true. But I do know at least one person who joined the industry. He was in it. I knew him at Abbott, I'm pretty sure, for a couple of years, and he really didn't like it at all. And he left and went back to practice. So it can happen, but you're absolutely right. It's very difficult indeed. So that's some of the things. I mean, there's personal, there's professional, and we can talk about some of the other things that, excuse me, help you in the pharmaceutical industry, or things that may deter you from it. So
I had my own kind of brush with going into industry. I worked independently as a medical journalist and consultant for 10 years outside of practice. And I was speaking about the new drugs. And over time, the new drugs I was talking about weren't new anymore. I had been involved in their development, doing clinical trials and so on. I was kind of an epilepsy expert, but over time, I was sort of getting more and more kind of distant from what was happening today. So I made the decision to go back into practice, and because of regulations and JCAH and all kinds of requirements, even though I was perfectly qualified, very tough to get back in. And so at that time, I started looking into industry because I knew guys like you and seemed to be doing great. And I actually had an interview at a few, big drug companies, and they flew me down and picked me up in a limo. And, we did that whole routine. And, but at that time I was kind of oh, I don't know, I guess more naive and idealistic. And I remember sitting in the lobby, and it was like an airport atrium in New Jersey. I remember. I won't
Mhm.
mention the name of the company because I don't want to offend anybody, but and I had to sit and wait for my next appointment. It was beautiful lounge, and up at the ceiling they had these TV monitors, and which was kind of a new thing, back then, to have TVs on the wall. And but the TV didn't have a program. It had two digits. And I noticed that everybody was quite well dressed also, pretty
Oh
snappy
yeah.
dresses. The
Yeah.
men, the women and the men would sort of stroll to whatever their next destination was across this giant atrium and look up, and they would all glance at this, TV, and then, continue on their way. And it just had two numbers on it that I think rarely changed, and I couldn't figure it out. And finally, when I was I said, by the way, what is that up there? Well, it was the stock price of the
That makes sense. Yeah.
and which, if you work at the company, it's a pretty important thing.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
but that kind of sort of somehow was symbolic of the corporate world to me, and I felt that it really wasn't going to work for me. So let's talk about small pharma versus big pharma. Does that matter? Here I am. I think I really love medicine, but I think what you said, one of the sort of super kind of redeeming value of working in pharma, and this is true even in politics, is instead of helping one person at a time, something you do like get, Depakote approved, you're going to help thousands and thousands of
Yeah.
people, and not just, the next, I mean, because you only do so much in a day. And
Yeah.
so that's pretty exciting. So if I were going to start out in pharma, should I look for like a little company that's got 20 people, out on 128 outside of Boston? Or do I want to go with Pfizer, or does it matter?
Well, it does matter. There is a big difference between little and big pharma. And it's pretty much what I think what you might guess. In the little pharma, you have a much more personal contact. And because it's small, you'll tend to have more of an influence on decisions. Um, but that said, I think a decisive factor is what sorts of drugs they're developing and what areas they're in. You have to be happy in the uh, area that you've chosen. And I don't, you know, big pharma is more impersonal. It's big, but on the other hand, you have a lot more resources. You have a lot more backing, and you get, to be involved in really in, you get in, you get in with important projects no matter where you go, but more so in big pharma. And you have resources in big pharma that are tremendous. In
Like,
small pharma, you're able to influence decision making more, and it's more personal. But the caveat is, even in a small company, people don't may not get along. I use the example of GW, and I hope now Xenon, where people really seem to cooperate extremely well with each other. But I have been in companies where that maybe wasn't as good a situation. So for me, personal interaction is important. I guess you could figure out. And if you're working with people that aren't getting along, it's very unpleasant and very hard to get things done. But if you're in a cooperative environment, it's tremendous. It's
let
like
me ask you
having,
a question.
yeah,
You
go
you
ahead.
know, budget my energy. So going to 20%, I'm going to become an expert in whatever field, opioids or epilepsy. So that's 20%. And
Mhm,
20%, I'm going to learn how pharma works and the structure and
mhm,
interactions. 10% about my competitors. And
mhm.
what percent of my sort of mental energy has to go into navigating the politics of the corporate world?
Yeah, that depends on the company. Um, you know, i- if it's a larger company, you're probably going to have to spend more time on that. And by that, I don't mean so much the personalities as the structure, which
Mm,
you just alluded to. You've got a committee for this or a committee for that or a group for that, and you have to figure out who you should go to for each issue. And there are people around to help you, but sometimes it can be very difficult. You would think, oh, that's easy. You just go to the committee or the group that you're supposed to, but yeah, you have to keep people in the loop. And unfortunately, I've made my mistakes where I didn't keep people in the loop, not on purpose at all, but people find out you're doing something and they should have been included, and you get some bad karma from that, even though you didn't mean it. It's the way sometimes it happens. So I think there's no one answer to all that, Andy, but I think in general, in big pharma, you're going to be navigating that sort of thing, whereas in the smaller companies, it should be a bit easier and not quite as challenging.
Okay, well, I think we're going over time. I have about 3 more hours of discussion for you. But to wrap up, if I came to you and I said, Ken, I love what I'm doing, but I need a change. I want to go into pharma. I've been in practice. What's my first step? What do I do?
Well, the first would be, I think, to look if there's um, a lot of times you have these headhunters, who are helping people. They often have people getting into the industry and they have experience in that. So if you can find someone like that who has done that sort of work, it's good to talk to them, because then they may be able to steer you, first of all, to a company that might be looking for someone, and second of all, they can tell you about their own experience and what happens. Now, they're obviously not going to be able to tell you on a granular level, but they can give you a lot of general advice about how to go. So, that's off the top of my head what you could do. I was lucky; I was called into the industry, so I had people already to talk to who could guide me. But if you're just de novo going after it, that might be another possibility, to call someone like me. If you have a friend who's in the industry and you want to go over things. That's happened to me a number of times, and I really do enjoy that. I do like, talking to people about it, because, as we said earlier, it's not for everyone. And the more the better off, you'll be, but nothing is quite like you think it is till you get there. It's going to be, I think, if you really like research and being on cutting edge, that's one thing. The other thing is making sure you can work in a team. Because in the corporate world, whether it's big or little pharma, you have to work in a team and you have to know how to do that. And it may sound easy, but it's not quite as easy as it seems. And you have, what we talked about, keeping everyone in the loop and being mindful that, as a practitioner in my own private practice, I ruled the roost, but you don't in pharma. You're one more employee, not that it's that bad, but you're in a much more cooperative environment with a lot of people, and you need to adjust to that. So those would be the things. Now, one other thing, Andy, some physicians have successfully joined the industry and kept up their clinical skills by going to a clinic each week and all. I think that's the exception. I know I haven't been able to do it. I did a little bit, but not much. Are my clinical skills as good? No, I don't know. Probably not. But you'll get it back. I gave a lecture at the University of Pittsburgh to the young physicians about the industry and the approval process. And I still remember at the very end, someone asked me about, if you see something in the drug development that's important, how you handle that. And my answer was, never forget who you are, ever. You don't give up being a physician when you join the industry. You are a physician in the industry. And that has a tremendous amount of responsibility with it. And one other thing, the pharma industry respects you. And they didn't hire you to be a non-physician. They hired you to be a physician. So never stop being one.
Ken, this has been great. I want to thank you for sharing your experience and expertise with us. I think this has been a great starting point, and really you've given us a lot of things to think about. So thanks very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I hope the young people out there who are thinking about it will give it serious thought. And I'll be happy if someone wants to talk to me. I'll be more than happy to talk to them as well.
Well, that's a generous offer. So I'm going to say contact me, and I'll forward on your contact information to Dr. Sommerville. Thanks.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. Well, thanks for having me, Andy.